Okay, good evening, everybody. This is the Mayoral Ad Hoc Committee on Equity and Diversity. We're calling the meeting to order at 5:35, and we are jumping right into our committee recommendations. I'd like to address the city on the public comment and how we're going to do that so that so that we can make sure we make that announcement as to where you should be sending public comment during the Zoom meeting. I guess I'll read it out. It's public comment at lewistonmaine.gov. Please use equity and diversity in the subject line so we can keep up with those comments that you have while we're having our discussion and dialogue about recommendations. Okay, so we'll start. We'll be going down the line from A to F in our items, and we have policy. We'll start with A, and we'll jump right in. Policies and procedures of Lewiston Police Department involving the use of force and restraint in its interactions with the public, and making recommendations on policy, practice, and procedural changes to ensure fair and equal and appropriate treatment of all. And we have a document to draft of recommendations. And so that I am not the only person reading, because I will, unless y'all want to watch me drinking water this whole time, we can, I guess, go down those recommendations, and then we can open the floor to our committee for those recommendations under A that we haven't already captured before the meeting. And I'll start. And is there anybody that wants to volunteer when I'm done to continue reading through, if that happens? I see a shake of Stephanie. I see Tonya. All right, so I'll know who to call. All right, so the first one we have, the first recommendation is the Lewiston Police Department should review policies and procedures to ensure that the terms shall and must are defined clearly and used consistently, both as written and applied. Then we have determine proactive steps the Lewiston Police Department will take to identify, prevent, and eliminate instances of bias-based profiling. For example, flag trends in community complaints. And the third one, and I'll pass it along, facilitate community focus groups for residents who live on the streets with high crime rates. And Stephanie, you want to take the next bullet? Does everybody have a copy of those bullets? If you don't, okay.
Yeah. Establish, search, and I think it's supposed to say seize procedures, right? That consider the trust and safety of the LGBTQ community. Next, involve the community in the Department of Policy and Procedures for the new body cameras. And I'll just do one more. Institute policy that requires officers to be trained to identify and respond effectively to a child, present or not present, whose parent is arrested, in order to help minimize potential trauma and support a child's physical safety and well-being following an arrest.
And Tonya, can you read the last two in that section?
Sure. I just lost where you were. Okay, so at the conclusion of each community police academy cohort, gather written feedback from participants that can be publicized. For example, what did you learn about the role of LPD that you hadn't been aware of previously? And what stereotypes or assumptions were dispelled by your experience, etc.
Okay. So I guess we can open for discussion for those, and following that discussion, I guess, Dennis, are we approving any of these recommendations now? And I'll throw that to the committee overall. Are we approving these now? Are we, that's it. Are we approving these now? Laura?
Quick question. So I'm not seeing my recommendations as part of this list. Are we going to be verbally adding recommendations?
Yes.
Okay.
And I did send them in, but if you don't see them, I would.
I I do believe they're incorporated if we have the final draft.
Yes, the latest draft I'm looking at that was emailed out does include, I believe, Laura's recommendation, which it just, it's actually the next bullet. I don't think it was just read off, as I just caught it. It starts regarding policies, procedures, and outcomes involving use of force.
Yeah.
Do you have that on yours?
I don't have that on mine, but I'll search my email and see if there's a different version I'm not looking at.
I must be looking at the wrong one too. So I must be looking at the same one as you, Laura, because I don't see that.
All right, so let me, if it's okay, Ayesha, I'll just read that final one that's on the most current. Regarding policies, procedures, and outcomes involving use of force, restraints, and interactions with the public. We need the collection and analysis of data requested earlier on during our sessions. This kind of collection and data analysis should take place every 5 years to find and follow trends. And that was, I think that was yours, Laura, correct? Yeah.
I think we've got an updated version up to the minute actually, because Howard sent some in just a few moments ago. So now I'm thinking, just to make sure that we don't leave anything out, if there's someone with an actual, the final list, I'm going to think the city, if you have the final list and you see something's missing, just call us out on it.
I don't believe the latest ones from Howard were actually incorporated. Those came in too late.
Okay.
So I would recommend that if you have them there, maybe just read, or maybe Howard wants to read them in, but I would maybe just add them in at this point verbally.
Okay. So again, if we're okay with the recommendations that we have, do we have to vote for each of those? We vote, how should we work that out? What do you think is best? Mark, my co-chair?
Yeah, so one suggestion is that we kind of do the thumbs up, down, or, you know, what's the one there, it's acceptable. And then Andy has a question.
I do. On the second bulletin, where it says determine proactive steps the Lewiston Police Department will take to identify, prevent, and eliminate, and it goes on. Specifically, I have two questions. One, what are the proactive steps? And second, do we really need it? Because I think the Chief O'Malley demonstrated that they're doing all those things.
Meaning flagging trends in community complaints? Things of that nature?
Yeah, to continue on. But I think he's demonstrated when he talked about it, that there's a checks and balance that goes on throughout the department where all those issues are being addressed.
Laura?
And if you don't like it, what specific steps do you want to take?
Laura, do you have?
Yeah, Andrew, I disagree with you. I think if all the adequate steps were being taken, we wouldn't be here in this ad hoc committee. So I think part of this is taking a look at the data. I think it's really hard for us to determine the proactive steps without really analyzing where the inconsistencies are. I think we need that kind of analysis first before we can really identify the proactive steps. I think some of them are included in this list, but perhaps we can join the two. I'm not sure who will it, but there might be a possibility to join these two together.
I think that was one of mine. And when I hear determining those proactive steps, I think that was what Laura just said is the point, that how I didn't see where we determined what those proactive steps were. And I don't think this committee would have the time to determine what those are with the time that we have. And so that's where I was going. So if we can definitely discuss changing the wording, but I don't think we've determined what those proactive steps would be for the Lewiston Police Department. So even if we are, we assume we're doing those things, and like she said, if we were doing them, it wouldn't be a question. Let's make it a point to recommend that we actually analyze that in a way with a more diverse and equitable lens. So that's what I'll say about that.
Yeah, if I could just add some of my thoughts on that. I think Andy's got a point that there is a lot of work happening whether it's all the correct work or whether we can make it better. I think we can always try to make something better. But I also want to just respond to a comment Laura said. This committee was created because our community saw some tragedies happen around us. And I think I, as mayor, wanted to make sure that we gave a thoughtful review of policy, which I think this committee is doing. But I never went into this assuming that the police department is doing things wrong. But I went into it with the assumption that we can always do better. Even if we're doing good, what can we do to be better? So I kind of want to share my view on that.
James and then Tonya. Gotta unmute yourself, sir.
Can we lift? Okay. The first bullet, Lewiston Police Department shall review policies and procedures. Should they be doing this by themselves? Or shouldn't there be somebody outside of the department working with them on this?
The third bullet, can you read out the bullet you're just talking
First bullet. The Lewiston Police Department should review policies and procedures. Shouldn't there be other people working with them to review those procedures?
Well, that's us.
Yeah,
just
so
did.
should we write that in? Is that?
Yeah.
I think you have to flesh out, you have to read that whole sentence, in my opinion, because it's saying the Lewiston Police Department should review policies and procedures to ensure that the terms, so that bullet goes, that speaks to, we're talking about terminology there within policies and procedures. And that's what we just did as a committee with them, well, with Chief O'Malley. So that's just our recommendation upon those two words that we feel they need to be clearly defined and consistently used, if that makes sense.
Well, it does, but are they the ones that are defining that?
I'm assuming that is connected to one of our tasks of creating a more sustainable committee for this work, and that work would probably be assigned to that committee. That was James, Tonya, Elgin. Elgin, I see your hand.
Thought is this. We obviously had presentations throughout these last couple months. And I think it's obviously that Chief O'Malley wants to do better. I think we need to allow Lewiston PD to do some of this work on their own and then maybe report back to us what has been changed versus us, I guess, micromanaging it and not having trust. So the biggest thing that goes on is building trust among each other. And if we're not building trust to go, we can't trust these guys to even look through policies and make some changes on our recommendation. Now, not to say that every recommendation that comes forward, they're gonna make, because some of it's gonna be due to actually state law, and some lawyers honestly probably gonna have to check over, especially use of force policy. But I think it's one of these stages where, again, if we have this mistrust, I think if we're trying to build trust among, again, us, community, and police, I think we need to allow them to say, hey, listen, these are the recommendations. Check over these policies, come back and let us know what policy has been changed. Every department in the state of Maine has looked over their policies. I guaranteed you, because they saw what happened. They saw the things that are trying to happen. So they want to make sure that, first of all, that they've done everything under their power to cover them for liability wise. So they're gonna make those changes, and they're gonna look through, because again, it's a CYA, it's a liability thing, because they want to make sure that we've done everything that we've done to be able to say that we've done things, you know what I'm saying, if they called on the carpet for it. So I guarantee you, I've talked to people from numerous departments, and one of the number one things have been on their list is they have gone through their policies with a fine-tooth comb, with lawyers, mind you, to make sure that it's the best policy that's out there.
Thank you. Andy?
And speaking to that, I read a Khalid bulletin today that says that they're modifying some of their policies just to conform with the laws that are coming down as a result of some of the incidents that just happened.
Hey, Stephanie, go ahead.
Thank you. I just, I wanted to kind of just segue off that, Andy. I think that's a good point. I mean, I think some of the recommendations that this group has come up with are going to happen anyway. And I agree with Elgin when we talk about like, is our task really to micromanage? I think not. Some of the recommendations that we've made talk about establishing focus groups, talk about establishing like town hall opportunities to get more input. But I think when it comes down to actual change that needs to be implemented by the Lewiston Police Department, I feel really fortunate in that, Chief O'Malley's been here at all of these meetings and, well, not, just about all these meetings and really representing that department well.
So just what I'm hearing is we are recommending that they review policy. Obviously that will be happening because we trust our police department to do that. So to James's question, I guess, will we have them do that themselves? It's more of we know what parts we're going to be supporting them with those focus groups, with the recommendations that we're sending down from the work that we've done and the ongoing work that we hope to do. So yes, they'll be doing that independently with support from our community. I saw another hand.
Yeah, thank you. While I don't want to say I don't echo the sentiments that some folks have shared, I do just want to also just elevate the concern that if you think about the amount of time that we have all spent meeting, and it's been a length of time, there hasn't been 1 week yet or one meeting yet that time in between that there has not either been folks killed, Black and brown folks killed, or near-death experiences at the hand of law enforcement in this country. So I do think that while we are not seeing that level of discourse with our own police department, which thankfully we're not, but if police departments across our country are fine combing their policies, they're not adhering to them, not all of them, and people are getting killed. And I know for me, being a Black community member, I don't want that to be one of my family members. I don't want that to be like, I wish we would have paid a little bit closer attention, because maybe then that fine tooth comb didn't reach as far down as it should have. So, I think that sometimes we have a false sense of security in the state of Maine, and in particular in certain locations within Maine, that happened somewhere else. We don't need to wait for something to be worse. And so just with that being said, I think that we do have to trust that our police department is going to take our suggestions and recommendations. And but I think they also need to do so with transparency. So to Laura's point, if there are community members that want to follow the data, that data needs to be available. So yeah.
And we're building trust on both ends. So I appreciate that too.
Absolutely.
It's about building trust. It's building trust on all sides, not both ends, all sides. Laura, I saw your hand.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm going to echo what Tonya said. And this isn't a recommendation, but it's just kind of a thought that I'm going to put into the cauldron as we're considering different options here. I think the work that Chief O'Malley is doing is amazing. I really, really do. And I think the amount of time and effort that he has created in everything from recruiting to trainings is just so incredibly impressive. For me personally, I do trust that. I will say though, that this is also not just us trusting the police department, but building trust between communities. We're building trust between the police department and the communities of Lewiston. And so in other international contexts where you've had this kind of schism between governing bodies and populist organizations, you have an observer, right? So, in international context, this is called an international human rights observer. This is someone who represents the community intentions and who sits and is par and parcel to the process of that government organization. So I think it makes sense that we might want to consider having, maybe we can come up with a better term than an observer, but maybe a community liaison, somebody who works with the police, who helps this process and serves maybe as partially a bridge in that transparency that Tonya is talking about. But I don't know if I'm making a recommendation, but I'm just going to put out an idea for what it's worth.
Well, let me throw, if it's all right, Ayesha, let me throw this out there. I think having community involvement in, so if a new policy is created by the police department or a policy is changed through the year, I don't believe that we can constantly be on watch. I think if there was some type of process that annually the police chief reports out new policies and allows input from community members, either through a standing committee or something like that, do you think that would meet? That way we're not micromanaging day to day. The chief doesn't constantly have to walk around thinking, he can do his job. We expect him to develop policies to keep our community safe, keep our police officers safe. But if it was annually looked at by a committee, would that suffice?
I like that suggestion. Any comments on that? Safiya?
Oh no, not to his thing. I have my own thing. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I actually had a comment
Mm-hmm.
on that. How you guys doing today? So DOC actually has a program that's very similar to what Laura was talking about. It's called the Watch. I believe it's called the Watch, or the Watchmen, or something very similar to that, in which they completely take a look at all policy. The people that they speak to are the people that run DOC, similar to what this would look like in conjunction with the police chief. I assume is what we're kind of taking a look at, would be something where we work together on that. But they do have a program where that's a consistent piece. It's not just once a year or once a month. It's a consistent, actually, people that are in that position. And that's all they do. They check, they make sure that there's recommendations that are able to be made. If they see something that's wrong, their job is to go and find a better way of doing that and to work alongside all members of the DOC to get that done. So if it's being able to be done, from a department standpoint, like DOC for Maine, I guess I wonder how come that can't be done here, in Lewiston. And also speaking to another point, I think, I know obviously we don't want to micromanage, I get that. But I also believe that the key here is to get the community to feel safe, right? And if that means that, it's a year or two of us proving that, it's almost like, when you're in a relationship and something goes wrong, right? At some point, you've got to take the time to go and build that back, right? Now, that may mean 6 months of not doing anything else but being in that relationship. But that's kind of the goal. I think that the goal here is to get the community to be on the same page with everyone. And so that way we're all not feeling the crunch a year from now, as Tonya said, or we're all not feeling the crunch when something wrong happens to that. So.
Does anybody have any other comments on, so Safiya, I'm assuming you want to add on a recommendation, or do you have
Yeah.
Okay. So before, just so we can move along in the process, we've had some comments about the pre-recommendations or the draft recommendations that we have. Do we hold those, come back with a revised set based on our comments? Or, thank you, Laura. Does that sound like a good idea? We've made some comments about those recommendations. We're going to work on those and come back. Okay. So moving on to additional recommendations that we want to add to that. Safiya, you can go ahead and start us off.
Thank you, Ayesha. So yes, I was reading the recommendations, and again, I think there's two documents, a newer one and an older version. So I don't know which one I'm looking at, but just reading A, the first one, I don't see a recommendation where, because we've talked a lot about this, even on city council, where a lot of our police officers respond to calls of quality of life, like mental health individuals who are having problems, overdoses, etc. So I think it would be good for us to add, maybe we can say something along the lines of create at least 2 positions that support the police department with individuals who are experiencing mental health problems, like contracting with community-based organizations.
Thank you. Elgin?
I got a question. Is that a city police thing? Is that out of the city budget? Like, how's that work?
So again, I think when we make a recommendation, staff will take it and identify, but just to add, actually the police department will be adding 2 full-time 40, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dennis, but they have partnered with Tri-County Mental Health. Grants were just approved and 2 40-hour positions are being added.
If I could clap, I would with that little clap.
That is great news.
You know that. Congrats.
So one is, and again, Dennis, jump in if I'm misrepresenting this, but one's going to be a substance abuse counselor. One will be a mental health service provider.
I believe you're right. I know that some of the details are still kind of being worked a little bit, but I think you're right, Mayor, pretty accurate with that. And that is part of the chief's public safety plan that he has been working on to present to the city council, which will be coming up here, early sneak peek for everyone, I guess, early December, he'll be presenting that.
Nice.
And that is going to be part of that component. So,
and then it gets even a little better because Marcella is working diligently on trying to find funding to provide mental health, caseworker type stuff we're hoping, and Marcella, correct me if I'm wrong again, my thought process was that was shared between the library and social services, so that hopefully some type of wraparound service. Marcella, would you like to add anything to that?
Sure. I mean, we've had some preliminary conversations about other partnerships we could have with Tri-County in particular in the meantime. But yes, to that point, I think some kind of position that would work at both, and potentially there'd be office hours at the library, for example.
Great. I don't think anybody's going to be shocked of what I'm about to say, but I do hope that there, within those positions, that there's some real intentionality about hiring a person of color without those credentials. Because if not, there are some folks that still will not engage. So just saying.
Good to have said.
Yeah. Hawa.
I see Hawa and Elgin. Hawa.
So you mentioned Mayor Care Grant and Dennis. Eventually, do you think that maybe the city will find the money to have that position, those 2 positions to be long term? I know the grant is going to run out, but we were hoping that in the next 3 or 3, I don't know how long would the grant run, but to keep that in the city level.
So the best I could tell you is that I think that if the program is successful and we're able to do it, then I don't see any reason why the city wouldn't be looking to include that in the budget in terms of budget, but it ultimately that comes down to the city council's decision at budget time on all of those types of any budget item in there. So, but yes, I don't see why that wouldn't be brought forward if we're having success with it in the grant. Dried up and it wasn't there any longer, then we would obviously want to continue that program. So I think the grant was really sought out in the sense that we were outside a budget cycle, kind of trying to do this. And I think the chief, was really building on his relationship with Tri-County Mental Health. And I think that's what really brought this. He was looking at one position. I think he was thinking that was a big ask and to get started with, even for the grant. And I think the conversation involved and grant opportunity he expanded to an even better opportunity for the two positions. So, so yes, I think we're there. It's just, it's through the budget process. So I'd love to say yes for sure, but I can't guarantee that till we go through the process.
And this, just so the committee is aware, this truly was in works before our committee started. So I think the chief recognized the need.
Awesome, thank you. Does anybody have any more comments about that? Thanks for sharing that too. That makes me smile. Elgin? Oh, sorry.
No, he was first.
I just want to say how much that's a good thing. I mean, I know how it is to bring people to the hospital and get the help they need, and then just to come out 2 days later and you're dealing with the same person. So it's good to maybe have someone to follow up and give that support that they need. So I just want to say that's a good thing.
Thank you.
So my question, because I know before the chief mentioned that we used to have that kind of funding from the state. Is there an opportunity to get the state involved again to permanently fund these positions?
I think that would be part of our, I think it's a great question, Councilor. I think what we would do is, obviously, I think we would look through all of those options as we continue. So just like the chief did, I think in this situation, recognizing there wasn't a budget line item to afford this, we began the discussions trying to explore it. Grant opportunity came forward. So I think we'd go through a very similar process as we started to either see the grant coming to a close. Obviously, this local taxes are always an option to put that in the budget, but we would definitely vet out any other options, especially if there was a state program. I would hope we would be able to identify that quickly if there was one, but absolutely, I would agree.
Just to follow up on Dane's comments, I just wonder if we could ask staff to do some research into that DOC program so that we could get information to the committee on how that works and exactly what that is.
Yes, can I just get clarification on what DOC is? I just want to make sure we.
Department of Corrections?
Yeah, Department of Corrections.
Just want to make sure that's it. Okay, we will certainly do that.
Thank you.
Any more recommendations? Let's keep it rolling. Mr. Andrew, Andy.
I was just saying, talking to Dane's program, the CALIA program does something very similar. It's an outside agency that comes in and reviews every 3 years on all their policies, procedures, and making sure that they do what they say they're doing in their policies. So the other question I would ask is, what's the price tag that goes on to the watch program? Because there's always a cost somewhere involved,
right?
As there is in the CALIA program.
Well, I'll assume that we'll have that information at some point and follow up. Yay. Any other discussion? Any other recommendations for the item A? Are we calling it item A? Okay. So what we're doing is we're coming back to with our draft of item A, recommendations to approve. Okay, so it's okay to move on to item B. That's awesome. All right, so I'll read it out and, oh wait, Elgin, I see you.
Okay, maybe I got confused. I thought we were gonna just go bullet by bullet and discuss.
So there is more discussion on item A? Or the bullet?
Okay, I just thought we were just going bullet by bullet to kind of discuss. So I guess it says establish search and procedures that consider the trust and safety of LGBTQ community.
Yep.
So how does that look? Because I know right now, if you're a male, you have a male search you. If you're a female, you have a female search you. And then we say binary, and how does that look like?
Well, that's why I also included with that recommendation to have a focus group with our community members who identify, so that we can be more informed about that, because we could be assuming that we have the procedures, but if our committee has not, I guess, explicitly called out or talked to or discussed or brought that voice to the table,
Yeah.
I don't want to just assume that that recommendation should be excluded and that group of community members should be excluded.
Okay, does anyone, I mean, does anyone have any ideas? I'm just curious. That's one of the things that kind of like, I just was really curious about, or it was just kind of like, just thrown out there.
So I don't have any specifics about what those search procedures look like. Me personally, there may be someone on the committee, but I do not.
So I wonder if I could just make a suggestion. I wonder if one or two committee members would be interested in meeting with that community and hearing some thoughts and then sharing that with the committee so we have a better understanding of what that would look like.
I know a couple people.
I'd be happy to poke around about that.
Okay. Is the committee okay with that?
Absolutely.
All right, good.
Any more discussion about the bullets that were included or any of the recommendations that were brought to the committee tonight in section for item A? All righty. So we'll move on to item B. I'll read it out. Is there anybody that wants to volunteer to help? No, there are not that many. Okay, I can read out item B and those bullets under there. The process by which citizen complaints against police officers and other city employees are investigated and, if necessary, recommend improvements to this process to ensure that such complaints are addressed thoroughly, objectively, fairly, and in a timely manner. I have 3 bullets on my paper. So if there are any missing or have been added, someone jump in. So the first one is update the city's discrimination policy statement to be more proactive, directly naming the advancement of equity and inclusion as a priority. Under that bullet is current statement. The city of Lewiston does not discriminate in hiring, promotion, discharge, layoff, recall, transfer, leave of absence, pay, fringe benefits, job training, classification, referral, or any other aspects of employment on the basis of race, color, religion, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, national origin, age, genetic information, disability, or military service. The second bullet is community dialogue opportunities should be established for public comment on services citywide to include neighborhood town hall meetings to increase resident familiarity and comfort with the city officials. And the third bullet is the city should contract with on-call in-person translators who could be available for residents conducting city business at time of need. If there are others on
and the fourth one is regarding citizen complaints. We need a citizen review board, both for the appropriate third-party review of citizen complaints, as well as a means by which to create an active bridge to community involvement.
So I'll open to discussion. I would like to either hear more about the update cities, the first bullet, just to like directly naming the advancement of equity and inclusion as a priority. What is that the sentence that would be, that's recommended to be included in there? Or does somebody have a suggestion, or what does that look like? I'm not sure whose recommendation that was. Elgin and then Howard.
I know I've seen on certain websites or certain agencies say that we strive for this. I don't know if we can do that. I know I think I saw some state police website out west, so that we strive for inclusion and you know, basically they just came out and said, hey, we basically they just came out and said we want to we're looking to hire, you know, minorities and females in the second sentence. But I think if you say, hey, we strive for equity, I think that kind of gives a clear message of, you know, what our goal is, as well as the rest of the statement previously.
Cool. We strive for equity and inclusion. Well, I'm not gonna fiddle with it, and y'all know I talk to myself when I'm not muted. Sorry about that. Any other discussion? Thank you, Elgin. That cleared it up for me and it gave me an idea. Safiya, go ahead.
The mayor said a fourth bullet, but I only see one. I don't know if this is the time to add a recommendation, but I feel like it's similar to what the mayor said, but then again, I don't know. So my recommendation is create a citizen oversight committee. I don't know if that was what the mayor was saying, but that was my initial actions that I wanted from the beginning, and I continue to want it. It's a recommendation. I would like to hear what everyone thinks about that. But also I have the language here that we can talk more about.
And just so I just want to clarify, the bullet that I read, I believe was Laura's recommendation, and okay.
Okay, so is it similar to, can you reread that again, please?
Sure. So regarding, Laura, do you want to read it? If it's right there, it's your recommendation.
It's fine. But you read it beautifully. It's great. Regarding citizen complaints, we need a citizen review board, both for the appropriate third-party review of citizen complaints, as well as a means by which to create an active bridge to community involvement. So yeah, Safiya, even in this conversation, we've heard a different version that Mayor Kerr recommended. So maybe part of something that we can do is maybe see how we can synthesize these visions together towards an ultimate recommendation for the next draft.
So while we're on I guess while we're on this bullet, if it's okay with Ayesha,
yep.
So this is the struggle with the citizen review complaint. In the state of Maine, with the Department of Labor laws and contracts, what ends up happening is it becomes such a watered down document because you can't release names, you can't release any specific real details, is what I'm hearing. So I think as we think about this process, and trust me, Dennis and I have been talking about it because we knew that this may become a recommendation. It's like, how do we get to a place that's acceptable to the community? And it's going to be challenging. And so I'm going to throw this out there. I mean, I know I've used this term the second time, so I apologize for that. But if we had a committee that annually reviewed use of force complaint or reviewed complaints in general to identify if there's a pattern being developed, that type of direction of this type of committee. I only throw that out there for a thought process because I'm not sure how we develop a committee that does that, that's not watered down and ineffective.
Andy and then Elgin.
I can tell you from a historical perspective on police departments that those review committees don't really work, that even if they've been implemented over time, they fade out. The other issue that comes into play is that this is going to be contractual language with the police unions, and that if you want to indoctrinate, you're going to have to change the language, and most likely it's going to cost you money.
Thank you.
I know that sounds, both of the statements, Andy's, mine, sound like really negative, but I think it is the challenge that we'll face to come up with a recommendation that will work.
Laura and then Elgin.
I think Elgin was before me though.
Oh, yes, you were. I'm sorry. It's Andy, Elgin, Laura.
Again, I'm trying to meet somewhere kind of in the middle a little bit. I think if someone made a complaint and it got investigated and they felt like, hey, you know what, my complaint wasn't really seriously investigated, I really think that I was really done wrong. I think we should put it almost to, and sorry, Dennis or Dale, to almost throw it up to the high command of the city and go from there. And if the person still felt like, hey, you know, I think that, you know, you guys playing favorite, you aren't really taking it seriously, then I suggest that we just bring in almost a third party mediator, and that they get all the materials and look at it. And it's someone third party who's not again, who really has no stake, no money in the game to really look at that. Again, I know what you're saying. We need, again, I know a lot of people think, hey, when I go to the police department, my complaint is not going to get taken seriously. So again, and it's just, again, traditionally these boards haven't worked out, but I think we can find a way that, again, we can find an alternative to go, hey, a chain of command where, hey, listen, I could keep moving my problem up to the step, and again, if we don't find anything, then it goes to a third party again who has no, not a stakeholder, that again, I can get all the material and then to make a final decision. So almost like a mediator if it has to go that far. I think that's kind of the suggestion to kind of meet a little bit in the middle. So curious on thoughts.
Would that, to Andy's point that he brought up about the cost of that, would there be a cost with a mediator as well, right? I'm all about it if that would work. I do like the idea of community kind of involvement there, just because I think that builds trust and rapport with the community, which is exactly why we're trying to do all these things. But I mean, if the community still can't see anything, right? So if it's just so watered down that it's like, what is this? What do you even want me to do with this? I don't think you're going to find community members that are going to be willing to stay engaged, right? To your point as well. But with what you're saying, Elgin, for like, if it does go up and, folks still aren't satisfied with, at the highest levels of city administration, would there be a cost to that mediator, and where would said mediator come from?
So obviously I think there would be a cost.
Mhm.
And I honestly, I think you just, like anything else, you build it in the budget. But again, it's one of those things, it's kind of like, I'll just use a lot of complaints that I've gotten over the years, that I've gotten that I swore at somebody. And so someone might look at it, supervisor pulls the tape. Nope, you didn't swear at the person, boom, unfound it. Well, that person might say, hey, you know what? We really need to keep going up to the chain of command. I think eventually, we need to take, certain complaints we need to take probably more serious than others. But I think if it's something that shows, it's kind of like, well, gee, I can kind of, maybe it's unfounded, but again, maybe it's one of those things that, again, it's whatever taken place was maybe so, sometimes what you see was so egregious that you might say, you know what, maybe someone needs a third look, needs to take a look at this. And two, there's kind of building trust that go, hey, my complaint will be taken seriously. Obviously, I think that's from what I've heard, it's been a big issue that people say that they felt like they've been wrong, or sometimes a lot of people just say, hey, they just want to have a conversation, sometimes with the officer, or they just want to have a conversation just to kind of say, hey, this take place. They didn't even want anything to happen. They just kind of wanted their opinion to be known. Again, trying to meet somewhere in the middle a little bit.
Laura, you've been waiting for a moment.
It's all good. This is important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I guess maybe just kind of offering a similar solution to the idea of the LGBTQ research, that it seems like, if there's a citizen review board and they ultimately can't see any information, then that's not particularly useful. And I could really see, to Andy and then echoed by Tonya, that if you can't really do anything, then people are going to peter out, and frankly, life, COVID right now. So I could see multiple versions of this, so maybe it's a third party mediator that is close to the community in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it's a citizen review board that is on call as needed, rather than something that kind of stands as a permanent component. Maybe it's a citizen review board that shows up once a year. I think this is going to take a little bit more research than what we have right now. So I'm wondering, similar to Mayor's recommendation before, I'm wondering if there's a few people that might be interested in taking a look at what's worked, what hasn't worked, and just kind of coming up with options for us to consider.
And I know Portland has a citizen review committee. I have not looked at the document, but I've spoken with people who have, so that's kind of third hand. But again, I'm not sure this committee would be satisfied with what's in place there. But I like Laura's thoughts. How about a combination of things? If it's a third party And then annually, we still look for trends because I know our police department already does look for trends individual officer wise. So, you know, if they've gotten a few complaints, that their direct supervisor, like their sergeant, will carry it up the steps. So I know it's important to them. But annually, could we sit down and just say, Chief, talk us through the general complaints and is there concerns on patterns? But,
I have a, Ayesha, can I go?
Yeah.
So just several comments. Why I want to keep pushing on this is because there are a lot of community members who just don't feel confident about our police department because of language barriers, because of past experiences, whatever it is. Whenever I go to the site, I only see, like, in order to like make a complaint, there's either like I think the city administrator that you can connect with or the police chief. But whatever this conversation is, I want a third option of people, like someone that's citizens that, you know, someone they can contact that's different from the police, that's different from the city administrator, that has a different opinion. And like annually is like, that's way too long in my opinion. Things happen all the time. Maybe we can do like biannual, you know, twice a year rather than an annual. And I don't know the process, so I don't know why it would be watered down. I don't know why like a board wouldn't know, like, you know, the specific complaints, the names, etc. It's probably state laws. So yeah, maybe it can be like biannual. We can look at trends, but at the end of the day, I want a different opinion for our community members, different from the city administrator. No, nothing to you, Dennis, and the police chief.
It sounds like our charge is to enhance the process that's already in place. So I don't see why, like, I appreciate that, Safiya, and in all of the options that we've come up with, adding another option is like the obvious, whether it be a third party, whether it be a community group, whether it be a review, adding and enhancing that process by adding a couple of more layers for folks who are either marginalized or misunderstood or just feel like they're just not being treated fairly. Whatever the case may be, they should still have that option. So Mayor, I think that's a good idea of having some folks look into and maybe collaborating or coming up with something to bring back next time we review this item. Is that okay with everybody for that fourth item? Go ahead, Andrew. Unmute yourself.
Safiya, can you kind of explain or what are you thinking about as far as a third party? I mean, you know, you've eliminated the chief and the city administrator. Who are you thinking about is going to intervene, not intervene, but be that third party?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, it's a thought. Oh,
Safiya, can I help out? Because and there's, so in the school system, when we have complaints or a parent doesn't feel comfortable and they don't want to go to their principal or administrator, we have a parent coordinator or we have a parent liaison. I don't see why there wouldn't be some sort of liaison that would be that, I guess, other option that would be that mediator for whatever the disconnect may be. It should be an option in there if our community feels like there aren't enough options. So that's just piggybacking off that. Elgin, I see you.
So I just want, I'm just trying to get the kind of visualize this. So would like this third person, would they, I mean, because either way, this complaint has to go through the proper channels. So would this person go fill out a complaint on their behalf and then work the channels that way? You know what I mean? Like either way, there's got to be some working together or to figure out what the problem is and to see, if the problem is founded or unfounded, and what needs to be done. So I want to is this more of someone, just more of a comfort level to say, hey, I'm not really comfortable going down to Lewiston Police Department. Can you help me get the complaint process rolling? Is that what you're looking at?
So I think there's some confusion. I think Ayesha was thinking that person, well, you're right. I think there's two different subjects here. The liaison would be someone who could help a person go through the process. But the next step, I think, is a little bit different when it comes to being concerned that something wasn't investigated properly. Could I, if it's okay, Ayesha, I'd like to ask Dennis, we have an appeals board within the city. Can you just share what their role is now? And is that something that, just share what it is, and maybe it's a possibility.
Well, they're only brought, I think it sounded similar, I'm not sure who said it, but only kind of on call, on demand. So if there's an appeal that needs to, for a decision that's made, or an action from the city, they can be brought forward to the appeals board. They're actually scheduled when something's brought through that process, and that recommendation or request is made. This type of, I don't think, this type, what we're talking about isn't necessarily under their current charge. But it's a structure, kind of what I just heard, like I said, of a on-demand kind of committee, more or less. It's only brought together when there's an appeal that falls under their charge, and then it's scheduled and goes through a process of steps to get to that point, I suppose. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that they're more focused on like tax issues, and
yes,
so, yeah, that probably wouldn't fit the dynamics that we need.
Yeah.
I kind of like Elgin's idea that, that middle man and, overview after the fact. I mean, it still has to go through the whole process through the police department, I think, before it gets to that step, because it may be settled in that process. But
Andy, and I see hands in there. How Elgin, I see you too.
Dennis, it's been a while, but if I remember right, if there's somebody's not happy with the outcome of the decision, if they go through a complaint through the police department, isn't the city administrator a mediator, or he's the person that hearing goes in front of?
So yes, I mean, and that can happen. I'm certainly in the chain of command. So I mean, if the chief, or ultimately, if the police department makes a decision and they're not happy with it, I'm the appeal person for just any department. It's not just our police department. So I think that it really, I guess it stops here. And then honestly, I think it's also just important to clarify, the city council is also another step that I haven't heard in the discussion here. And there's public comment opportunities, and that happens. I'm sure, over the years, I know in my experience that's happened where no matter what department it is, if a decision is made and it goes through the process of, appeals, whether it be formal or informal appeals, but going through that process, ultimately, they're generally, if they're not happy with the answer or the decisions that's being rendered, they are recommended, they can go to the city council and speak to the city council and raise a concern. And at that point, the city council can direct me. They can't direct any other director or staff, but they can certainly direct me to take additional action. So whether it be a third party like you're talking about, or have a review, they would be able to make those kind of directives to me, and I would be required to carry those out.
keep in mind, the city council would be very restricted publicly to have, people complaining about individual employees or details of victims, any of that stuff. So that would be very restrictive. I would not want to be in that position as the mayor, trying to balance that. I think Elgin was next, or Howard, one of the other.
With Howard and Elgin, but she said no, thank you. So Elgin,
All set.
right now. Nope.
I'm all set.
Ayesha, he's all set. You're on mute.
I'm sorry, I had kid troubles. It's about that time. Okay, so does anybody have any additional recommendations that they would like to add to B? Go ahead.
Okay, so when you guys say the city should contract with the on-call in-person translator. Would it be a possible that one person can, again, it all goes to that budget season, budget process, to maybe in the future have a person who is a interpreter for the city instead of on-call.
Have someone there permanently. as
Permanently, yes.
well. Andy, I see you.
I think that's not a bad idea, but my question would be, how many complaints are we talking about during the year before the city takes on a full-time interpreter?
So when I mean interpreter, I mean like having a person permanently there, not just for the complaint, but for also the city as well.
So those two recommendations together.
Absolutely, recommendation together.
Is
So that person can be used for example, like if the city hall, when like HR, something like somebody looking for a GA or something like that, having a community, having a somebody community relation who's an interpreter translator there, not just only for the complaint.
Tonya.
Yeah, to piggyback on your answer, Howard, that too, in my mind, serves both purposes because that person in essential is on call. They're just already there and ready. So if today they might be needed, at, the city clerk window, another day they might be needed in general assistance, another day might be needed at the station. But I think that that to me makes sense opposed to saying like, who's going to be the on-call person? How are we going to really have that person available and, like at a moment's notice? If there are folks that are coming in that aren't bringing an interpreter with them and they're not able to communicate, why, if there's a way to make that communication process streamlined and have somebody already there, then shouldn't we, that to me is an equitable decision.
Right.
Oh, one more. As Tanya was saying, what other forms of communication do we have at the city hall level? For example, if I walk in and I don't know how to get to the GA office, or if I stop at one clerk and ask her for a question, that clerk, does she have a form of communication? For example, a video interpreting or something that it's quick, easy, instead of like asking for somebody else to interpret, like here, like for example, someone who's also a sign language, American Sign Language, do you guys have some kind of like device that's available already so that person's questions can be answered?
I just want to, I don't know if, I wasn't sure if that was a recommendation that you were making or a question. So I'll just answer the question. We do not have that right now. We don't have it. Yeah. So, but we do have a language line that we use. We have access to, all of our departments can access that. I know my executive assistant here is usually the first stop for folks. We're right on the first floor. So sometimes when they're wandering around looking for that, so that is available, and I know that they know how to use it from that. But again, a device or video, something to that effect, or a live person, no, we don't have that. Just the language line.
Go ahead, Tonya.
All right, sorry, Ayesha, cute cat, Stephanie. But to that point, because how much are we? Could we look at that and say how much are we paying for that language line on an annual basis, and can that be transferable to a human being? And with that, like what languages are we, are we utilizing most? Can we extract the data from the utilization of that service?
I think I can just answer a little bit. Yes. I think we have a decent sense of, we could get some of that information from the language line. I think our general assistance office has always been a good resource for us for the different types of languages that they're dealing. They obviously use the language line a lot because they'll have a variety of backgrounds coming through there in different languages. So I think we have a good, decent pulse on the wide range of languages that we have within the community. My only, I guess my only comment is finding one individual that covers all. And trust me, I have met some really, really bright people that can speak so many languages. It's amazing to me. We have staff currently within our general assistance office that I can tell you speak 2, 3, 4 language fluently.
Sure.
Just very impressive individuals. But again, that's still only 4, and we probably have 7, 8 different languages easily that you could say. So just throw that out there. But
Yeah, that's a good point.
And Indy and
I can tell you from being at 911, you have to have the language line there, just because of the calls that come in, if they're criminal in nature or if they're emergency in nature. It is expensive, but I don't see how you can minimize the cost involved. What's being used at 911. Well,
I'll say that having that human person serve those purposes is an ideal recommendation, right? So
So,
go ahead, Mark.
excuse my ignorance. So is there like one person who can do, I think we have like 20 something languages in LPS, is that correct? How do we address covering all of that?
41.
41, okay.
Going up, 42.
I will say that it's not just one person, it is a team. So even me saying that comment of saying finding one person, we know that's not a thing. But striving to add to that staff of people who can support, I feel is an ideal recommendation that we can work with. Laura?
Sorry.
You make it open dialogue, go ahead.
I can see the difficulties in trying to translate for 41 different languages, even if it was just a few. Say that it was for some of the major languages. Not only does that personal connection is meaningful, but I think a big topic that we've been talking about is how to build trust in our communities. And so having the community see that this is prioritized to a place where we are bringing people on to do this so that they can personally connect. We honor this language so much that we're bringing this person on, goes to a large degree in building trust in communities. So that alone might be worth having us look into this.
Thank you, Laura.
I know for LPS, we have say it's going up 41 or 42. I can't keep a track. We're not saying we have all those 40 languages in-house. We always look at the most predominantly language that we need, that we hire, that we have that in-house, and the rest we use it either video or language line. But it's a start. Like having a person who is one person in-house City Hall is a start, and then maybe eventually one day we can expand and see, okay, what are the needs? Like how maybe we should have like a little house that says welcome center where we can get like a language line where if you need an interpreter, it can be scheduled right there and then.
Would contracting with LPS maybe fill that? Or I don't know, I'm just trying to find, so I like the idea of having someone here because that does send a very clear message to our largest immigrant community, because truly that's about all we could do.
If you're gonna pay your funding, yes, but
right, I agree. Right, we would have to identify the cost to contract with LPS, because that would then open up multiple interpreters to us. But it wouldn't, I'm not convinced it would provide somebody in City Hall, and that's an important part of it, because it would be more on call. Hey, LPS, we need an interpreter for this language, and then it's a hop, skip, and a jump over to City Hall.
Agree.
And I'll also say, again, having a person who, if I can't get it, I will figure it out for you. If your complaint, if I can advocate for you, or if I can be in a space for you, it says, again, something to us wanting to build trust and us wanting to grow from this seed of a recommendation, or this, seed of of a person and where we want to go and strive for. So
Well, I think it will also serve that purpose. And when we talked about, you know, increasing the racial and cultural diversity of staff, what it will show folks that are coming in and seeing that someone is there as a staff person, it may also make them say, oh, okay, well, this is a place that's welcoming to people that look like me. So it'll serve more than one purpose.
Good point. Thank you.
do we have any other recommendations in that section at this time? It's 6:45. I think we can, as far as I know, in C, we have 2 recommendations. Dare I go to it? Let's read it. Let's start. And then we can see where we are in about 10, 15 minutes. Okay. C is the type and nature of training provided to municipal employees, including police officers, in regard to such areas as bias, equality of treatment, and crisis management / de-escalation, and to identify employees or employee groups that should receive training and what that training should consist of. And the first recommendation is the city should add a position to the Human Resources Department focused on equity and diversity, including but not limited to developing a city workforce representative of the demographics of the city, advancing equitable policies, trainings, practices, and procedures, and ensuring that the city delivers services in an equitable and inclusive manner. And the second recommendation is the city should develop a systematic training program across all departments to address such areas as bias, equality of treatment. Am I repeating myself? No, I'm not. Equality of treatment and crisis management / de-escalation, to include a review of current training programs and trainers involved to identify possible biases and limitations, plan to diversify trainers, including seeking those working outside of Maine to broaden available perspectives, initial and new hire trainings, as well as ongoing required trainings for all city employees, with additional specific trainings based on job duties, conducting diagnostic assessments of staff across all departments, including the Lewiston Police Department, to gauge implicit bias levels to help inform individual training needs, conducting post-training assessments to measure understanding and improvement. And I'm checking to see if there are any other drafted recommendations under C.
Yeah, Laura has one. I think that she submitted.
Yeah, so I'll distill it to the actual recommendation and then maybe make a comment with it. So it is worth revamping the training system as much as possible to do so. To 1, focus efforts on key goals and directions. 2, delve more deeply into topic focuses, which more often creates tangible results than momentary introductions. And 3, invest in assessment modules that take place throughout the year rather than simply upon recruitment. It is essential to track the way officers are engaged with the information they are receiving, most especially as they experience stress on the job. So I could see how that this is in line with the second recommendation that was made. And so perhaps these two can be synthesized together, but I will put in a bit of a caveat with my thinking with this, that I was concerned about the sheer multitude of trainings that were present. And I worry about adding more trainings. Right? I mean, the list was like yay long, you know? And so what I want to move to, what I guess my recommendation is to move to quality over quantity. And so I do think that there needs to be an overhaul that needs to happen here, so that we can maybe pare that down a bit, and refocus and realign as much as possible. I know some of them are mandated, realign to, I think, what the goals are that we heard from Chief O'Malley as he was reviewing this with us. So I think there's some synthesis there between my recommendation and the second one as well.
I have a quick question about and I think Laura worded it different, but the conducting diagnostic assessments. Any legal issues with that, Dennis, that you're aware of? I'm not sure.
I honestly don't know without, I think I would need a little bit more of an understanding of what that means, I guess, and what that would look like, and then be able to probably dive into that, I guess, from a legal standpoint. But I wouldn't be able to comment at this point. I don't think I know what it is yet to be able to respond complete. What it looks like, I guess, what I understand the wording, but just what does that actually look like, and as it's implemented in that, and looking at that, and then we could certainly review that from a legal standpoint.
Elgin,
would
I see
assume-
you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Mark, and then Elgin, once you
Well,
finish.
I would like to understand what that means. I would assume that means we provide some type of test to identify somebody who might be biased. Is that anybody?
Well, I know those tests already exist. I hope all of us have tried them and tested them and used them. There are tests, research-based tests, and Laura, please help me out, because this is more your area than it is mine anymore. But there are ways.
So I'll jump in for a second. So I actually didn't word diagnostics, so I'm not sure who did. But you know, in any sort of assessment, you're really trying to evaluate that person's strengths, weaknesses, knowledge, skills, orientations within a given topic. And so not only trying to do that one time, because if you test in that one moment, then it's that one moment and the experience that exists in that one moment, as opposed to throughout a length of time where you get a better and more accurate profile. So for me as a researcher, I would want to be able to have those kind of touchstones throughout the year to see, okay, well, how are people doing in terms of bias? You know, how are we doing in terms of cultural competency? How are we doing in terms of de-escalation? And do we see trends in certain moments of the year and certain interactions and so forth and so on? That's what I would be interested in.
Elgin, go ahead, and then Tonya.
I like to see from the city, like just regular city employee, that when they have the interview process, that they maybe whatever spot they're going for, that they're maybe sit around for an hour or 45 minutes, nothing crazy, but to see how it is to work in City Hall, how to work with different demographics. You know, I think Lewiston's, you know, it's different with different cultures and stuff, and sometimes people, you know, don't realize that until they're thrown right into the position. So I like to just see if, you know, nothing crazy, but when you go in the interview process, say, hey, you know, can you hang around half an hour, 40 minutes to see, you know, what's it like?
I like that. Does anybody have any other recommendations or any comments about those 3 recommendations that we're going to be coming back to? Go ahead, Tonya.
So as far as the last one, that includes the conducting the diagnostic assessments. The wording in the end there, so, oh, let's see, what did I write down? Okay, so the part that talks about conducting post-training assessments to measure understanding and improvement, I think we really need to flesh that out a little bit and maybe change it to, because if we're trying to measure understanding, we're also trying to identify the behavior change, right? Or we're doing this for no reason. So I think maybe if we're going to we should change the wording to conduct post-training assessments to measure understanding and behavior change if or as needed. I don't know about the wording on the last 2 words, but I think behavior has to be in there, because that's what we're trying to identify. Is this training increasing understanding and therefore changing behaviors? If not, it's just these regular trainings that we already have that are old, that people are just really not being impacted by. And I think Laura has something to add.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's kind of the purpose of these touchstone moments as you go. Yeah, because ultimately you're trying to correlate these kinds of assessments to its application, right? So if you're correlating it to a certain type of, you know, interaction that's happening on the street or a certain demographic, you know, whatever's going on, then you can kind of get an understanding of whether the training is implicated in your behavior. So yeah, for sure. And I think that also, just for a word for a second, sometimes people feel like they're being tested. You know, people are trying to like look at you and discern where your faults are. This is to create systems of support. This is ultimately to say, okay, well, how can we better support you in this process? Is it education? Is it support in this given environment, this certain interaction? What can we do? So it's really worth kind of inculcating it within the culture of law enforcement rather than something that kind of stands alone.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments about our, was that C? Because I want to make sure we give some time to the public for public comment. Howard, go ahead.
I just have a quick question. When you bullet number two, the second bullet, it says initial and new hire. The last one says based on job duties. Is it for everyone, or it's just specific on your job duties? So does everyone get the whole training, or it's just individual job duties?
Well, it says with additional specific training based on job duties. So there is an umbrella or a group of trainings that everyone would receive. And if we needed to add some based on their job, we would. So I'm assuming that everybody gets the base, and we'll there'll be a base for what trainings are received. And then if we needed more, I'm just going to give the example of the police force. If we needed to go further, because the police have such an intense, or whatever the case may be, we would have additional trainings. Does that make sense? I was working that out as I was working it out with you. Any other comments or recommendations for this section? Tonya.
Were we going to address the frequency or infrequency of some of these trainings? Like, for example, I can't tell you how many groups of folks that I have trained around issues that concern racial diversity, and they've said, well, we only have the annual training. That's it. Or like when we get hired and then it never comes back around again. And I think there are a few things that happen when that takes place. Number one, folks that work together are not brought together to continuously train with one another because they're getting it at different spots. So there's some learning that can be had with folks that are able to do these as either cohorts or just like quarterly. We're going to make sure that we, give a refresher training or maybe an add-on. But like Laura said, when we're looking at, it really does take this to take it apart and then rebuild it and say, these are great, but they don't really apply to our community, or this really isn't, like, this is just basically patting us on the back saying, yep, and we have this and we have this and we have this. But if they're not really, having an impact or changing behaviors, then why are we doing them? So, can we add something in about making sure that these trainings are more frequent than just either when you get hired or once a year?
So if I could, I think, it might be incumbent on this committee. I'm not sure how many trainings we're talking here, and obviously it's a budget issue, so staff will follow through with some information once we decide. But is this committee prepared to make like recommendations on a group of core trainings that staff would have to take, like new hires, some around the police department? And if so, then maybe a couple of folks could also look into that to present. Ayesha, what do you think?
Listening. So, okay, so I saw Laura and Tonya. Now it consists of looking it up, because I know that there's a list of required training that they would have anyway, and we're not messing with that. But what you're saying is looking at the other trainings that they are engaging in throughout the year, and seeing what is effective and what's not, and coming up with sort of a core curriculum, excuse my edgy speak, but a core curriculum of training for the year. Is that what I'm hearing, Mayor?
Yeah, I mean, is there something that can be recommended for the city first, for us to consider that we can bring to the council for core training? And Laura had her hand up, so.
Yeah. And Tonya gave a thumb too.
So the author of this bullet is going through a very specific topic. And so I am also just concerned about just the sheer multitude of things. If we're going to, ideally, I agree with Tonya, we need to be able to come back to these topics a little bit over time, but that becomes very, very difficult to do when you've got 200 trainings. So it needs to be pared down. So, you know, my personal recommendation would be a full review of the trainings and see what is possible, which would take some time. And I'm willing to donate my time to help with that process, but it certainly isn't going to be something that's going to happen in a couple of weeks. But I do think that a review that's done in partnership with the chief is worthwhile, so that we can create the best situation possible.
And it'd have to actually go beyond the chief, because I think city administration or our HR department would have to be involved. Just trying to figure out what's the best way for us to address this as a committee. I mean, if a committee member, or I'm sorry, go ahead, Andy. And
I don't think it's our job to kind of review and assess what the training is. I don't know what goes on in Public Works. I don't know what goes on in the city clerk's office. You know, let a group of city employees review and assess what the training needs are. You know, once again, I don't want to micromanage them. Give them the opportunity to fix what they probably have a better understanding of what their needs are.
yeah, but Andy, so I think this is different, because we're not talking about typical general training of what PAW do. This is more based on bias training, I think, and the types of bias training that's out there.
And we're assuming that we don't know what we don't know, and we need support to figure that out. So with that recommendation, we want to give an informed recommendation about what we are recommending.
But I agree with you, Andy. If we're looking at the totality of training, we should not be micromanaging and saying, hey, Public Works should be get invest training. And you're right, that's a department head. But I think centered around this equity committee, I think it'd be appropriate to make make suggestions. Again, knowing it's got to go before the council for approval. It's got to pass muster with our administration and our department heads. What are your thoughts on that, Andy, with that?
I think it's fine. But I just think that you're going to have some core training that you're going to probably have for everybody, and then set it up from there. But once again, you know, each department is different. So, you know, to sit there and say, we should do this for everybody, I don't think works.
Go ahead, Tonya.
I just want to say that I think, you know, because think about what our charge is here, well, what brought us to this committee, right? And you know, when we're talking about trainings around racial diversity, I don't think it matters if it's Public Works or the person that deals with, I don't think it matters. I think everybody needs that training. If they didn't, we wouldn't be here. And if it was already done and it was done correctly, we also wouldn't be here. So I think I'm not disagreeing with you, Andy, that like, if I'm a department head for whatever, something, and I say like, I need my people to make sure that they have these, that's not necessarily going to fit the next department. But I think any, you know, across the board, you know, if you work for the city, I do believe that you should have an understanding of the impact of racial inequity and the disparities that affect all people, especially people right in the community that you guys serve. So, I mean, that's just my thought. But I mean, there are so many. When we saw all of it was overwhelming to see all of those. So I don't know if every person that works for any department gets all of those, but it did seem like there was a lot of training. And what's the impact of all of those when there are so many?
I don't disagree,
Okay.
but you know, charge them with the job of figuring out what it is the training. I don't know what the best bias training is out there, and I think each one of us has a different view of it going in, and each department will say, you know, I need 3 hours, or I only need an hour. That's a lot for us to sit there and say, this is what you need. You need to do this. And we can make general recommendations and let them figure it out.
Thank you, Andy. So we're at 7:04 and we have attendees with their hands up. And I want to make sure that we give them that space to say their piece, if that's okay with our group right now.
Yeah, can we pick up this subject?
Conversation.
Can we pick this subject up again at our next meeting relatively quickly so we can make a decision? Or if Tonya and Laura would like to maybe have a sit down with our city administrator to go over some possible ideas on training, is that a possibility?
Within the 2 weeks?
Yeah, within the 2 weeks. It's more just a casual conversation with general ideas.
All righty, they say yay. And I saw Safiya and Hawa.
Oh, I think I raised my hand earlier.
Oh, you did.
I would like to be added to that training with Laura and Tonya.
I think that's a great idea. Safiya?
No, my question is, are we gonna do D or are we gonna do that next time?
We're gonna pick it up to next time. And I wanna finish the discussion, wrap up the discussion for C as well before going over to D. So I'm just, Dennis and our help. Laura, go ahead.
I know we're over time, super quick.
It's okay.
For that growing committee, I might recommend perhaps reaching out to the person who authored the second bullet and see if they want to be part of that conversation as well.
Dennis, was that me? Is that one of those that I recommended? Because I really can't remember. There were a lot of them. It was not me?
I'm not sure. I'd honestly have to go through all of the, to find out who it was. So
I'll look into my notes. It might be me because I think I'm the only one that put in that original document. So Laura, Hawa, and Tonya, I'll be speaking with you following this meeting. Awesome. So let's go. Let's go. And I stand by those recommendations. They're awesome. And they made sense when I wrote them. So we have an attendee, I think. Can we bring them in?
Here he comes.
Go ahead, Dan.
Oops, I think I did the wrong one. I apologize. Hang on one second. Hello.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hello. I think another wonderful meeting, and I applaud you for that. I just want to throw out something for whatever it may be worth. But back when I was police chief, and this goes back a good quarter of a decade, of a century, I should say. Anyway, we had been having some gay bashings outside of gay bars. And one day after an incident, members of the gay community came and picketed the police station. And the TV cameras were there and everything. And so after the cameras left, we invited them into the police station. And their claim was that we hadn't done anything, when in fact we had issued summonses for the assailants to appear in court. So we had in fact done something, but I felt that we needed to do something more. And so we created a hate biased crimes task force. And we invited members of various minority communities to come and meet with our command staff once a month. And in doing so, the committee wanted to advance an ordinance to the city council for anti-discrimination based on sexual orientation in 4 areas. employment, public accommodations, extension of credit, and I forget the fourth one. Anyway, right off the top of my head. But it provided an opportunity for members of those communities to interact with the command staff of the department. So if they had any complaints or whatever, they brought them forward. If there were investigations going on and we could provide them with the information, that provided the communication that truly what community-oriented policing is more than just programs. It's working in partnership with the citizens to solve problems. And so it requires that partnership. And who knows more about their problems than the people who are having them? And who knows more on how to solve them, but maybe need the police department to assist them in that process. Now, I don't know if, I've been away for so many years, I don't know if that committee still exists or if not, but I certainly offer that constructively. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And that goes with part of our discussion on that that community or that person that we can have in our city offices that can be that community liaison or that's that same part of that conversation. So I appreciate hearing that, and it's something that we're going to pick up with next time. So thank you. Are there any other comments from our community? I love hearing from y'all. If not, okay. So like I said, we're going to pick up where we left off really quickly. Once we get back in a couple of weeks, following up with all of those folks who had small tasks, including myself, to come back to give us more information on those recommendations. And so I guess I'll be looking for a motion to end our meeting if we don't have any more discussion.
So moved.
Second.
Yeah, and Tonya seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
That was fun. And I love this adventure. Have a good night.
So,
Bye, everyone.